Welcome back to another exclusive episode on the Passionate Pioneer podcast with today's guest, Karen Olsen. Hi, Karen.
I have.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show, Karen. You've got such a great story to tell. So, let me firstly introduce Karen to all of you. Karen's journey from the corporate world to social advocate is nothing short of inspiring. Beyond individual acts of kindness lies the power of systemic change and the power of humanitarianism. Sorry, one second. That's my Zoom going on my phone. In this exclusive episode, we delve into the heart of Karen's movement, Family Promise, to learn how she's tackling family homelessness head on, discover the strategies, the partnerships, and the policy reforms that are making a tangible difference. And we also explore how communities can rise together to create lasting solutions, proving that change is not only possible, but within our reach. Welcome again, Karen.
Be with you and your audience.
So, you've spoken openly about the profound loss of your mother that you experienced when you were a child. How did that experience shape your understanding of suffering and empathy in this world?
Something that I really didn't talk about for a long time. I fast forwarded and said, what struck me to start Family Promise was giving a sandwich to a homeless woman outside of Grand Central Station. And
Right.
yes, I did that. And yes, it was a spark to build Family Promise. But in my book, for the first time, I shared how my mother died. My mother committed suicide when I was just 12 years old. And I wasn't close to my father at the time. He was an alcoholic. He later stopped drinking when he was 40. But the suffering that I experienced really became part of me after my mother died. I remember I would hug a stuffed toy cat with a rubbery smiley face at night, and that little cat's face was washed away through my tears. Um, so it was a deep, deep pain, and it hurt. But then there was no um, programs for grief that they have now in the schools for everything. So it was just something you internalize and then you move forward. But that pain really created a hole in my heart. But that hole in my heart knew what pain was. And so I really didn't want others to suffer. Um, and so that made me very empathetic. And I went about helping people where I could. Now, had my mother not died in the way she did, would I have had that drive to reach out to people? Perhaps, but I don't think to the intensity that I had.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, Karen? Because so many women I speak to on this podcast and in life in general, it seems to me that, we've all had some type of traumatic experiences in our younger life that have served us well later if you turn the negative into the
Yeah,
positive, right? And propelled us forward to be in service to others.
I think so. Yeah, in that pain, there's a silver lining. And I know that was
Right.
true for me.
Right. And I think we can only teach and serve from our own life experience. And it is those moments of trauma that really change the course of our life, right? Change the course of our
Yes,
journeys.
yes, that's true. I mean,
So,
I'm sure that people in my community thought, well, here's this woman who had a successful business career and she lives in the suburbs and she started this organization, but they really didn't know the whole story that behind it. What propelled me was the death of my mother and the pain that I experienced as a result.
Right.
But again, that's a silver lining that propelled me forward to want to reach out and help others and ultimately form Family Promise.
Right, which we're going to talk about in a moment.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that then, because you were in the corporate world and you were successful in business, and
Yes.
then you changed to this social advocacy.
Uh-huh.
What was, and I understand you had those moments in your young life, but what was it that was the pivotal moment that changed from corporate to social advocacy?
I think it was when I would go into New York frequently for meetings. And at that time in the early 80s, it was hard to walk a city block without seeing somebody who was obviously homeless, a man lying on a subway grate, a woman pushing all her belongings in a shopping cart, maybe reaching into a garbage can for she saw a sandwich and wanted a bite of that sandwich. So I saw those people, and I think everybody did. But the message was clear, stay away. And I felt that way, that I never would really look at a person experiencing homelessness in New York. I guess because I was told that that was something to fear, or maybe part of me thought if I look at them, I'll want to help. So, this one day I was on my way to a meeting and I was about to pass an elderly woman, probably in her late 70s, who was frail. She sat on a crate outside the Grand Central Station. And this time, I had seen her before, and this time I felt I'll just run across the street and get her a sandwich. So I ran across the street and got a sandwich and an orange juice for her. And when I came back, she said, "Thank you. God bless you. I haven't eaten anything since yesterday." And we talked, and she took my hand at one point and held it in hers. And at that point, I feel like I crossed an invisible line. I learned her name. Her name was Millie. She had been married. Her husband was a chef. He died, and she had two sons. One had died, and the other was somewhere on the West Coast. She had lost touch. So she was really all alone, and that's something I could relate to, and the pain that she was feeling.
Isn't it?
So
Isn't that funny? And I'm sure that our audience and myself included, that would have touched a nerve because we do see homelessness and we do see
yeah,
suffering, and we seem to just turn away from it, don't we?
yes, yeah.
It's sort of become the norm. I mean, it's like the amount of violence as well that we see on in the movies and the TV.
Mhm.
We've become sort of numb to it, haven't we?
Yes, I think so. And it's acceptable to
Right.
walk by people who are experiencing homelessness and do nothing,
And
And that's what we do.
right. And how did you feel? How did that make you feel when you got over that the fear of
Oh,
approaching a homeless person, Millie? How did it make you
yeah.
feel personally?
It made me feel, very good, that she appreciated the sandwich. She, held my hand, and I feel we made a connection. So I felt very good about that. And I told my two sons when I went home about Millie. They were then 10 and 12. And my younger son, Doug, said, "Mom, why don't we go into New York and find more people like Millie and bring sandwiches?" So
Oh,
we did. Yeah, we actually roller skated around Central Park, but our 25 sandwiches were quickly given away. And but so next time we went in, we made 50 sandwiches, and we saw that in Grand Central State. I mean, in Port Authority bus terminal, anybody in the terminal who was on a Sunday afternoon, anyone sitting on a bench was not waiting for the bus. They were simply homeless. And so we got to know them, and we got to know many by name. Um, and, we gave out sandwiches. Sometimes we would bring clothing or gloves, something like that. And then it was about to be um, Thanksgiving time. And I thought, why not have some of our friends, Ed and Abe and Arthur and John back to and Louise back to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. Well, that's a fine idea, except first of all, and it didn't deter me. I'm not a good cook at all. And yeah, not at all. And second, I've never ever cooked Thanksgiving dinner or a turkey,
Right.
but I didn't think those things out. I just thought it would be so nice, you know. And it was, unfortunately, some of my neighbors came to my aid. Bill Harrison, who was a bond trader on Wall Street, cooked the turkey, and other neighbors cooked the side dishes, and we all celebrated Thanksgiving together. So I guess I'm always one to take a few risks. I don't know if they can be called risks, but I guess I don't consider them risks because I'm passionate about doing something. In other words, people say, well, aren't you afraid? And I'm really not. And so I guess I'm not afraid because I feel passionate about helping, and it brings me beyond the fear, and it meant so much to the people that came to my house. And
Yeah.
yeah, and we
I always
talked.
think, Karen, I don't know how about you, but I always think that, life is an experience. If you don't take risks, kind of quite boring, isn't it, really, just to go through
I
life
think
without
so.
taking risks, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Sometimes
Yeah,
you've got to face the fear and get through it, right?
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And if you face the risk, it makes life a little edgy, and I like that. But you know, I like to take risks that I think are reasonable if
Right.
those two words go together. Yeah.
Right. Um,
So yeah,
yeah, I think that's interesting what you said about your son, that you went home after you'd met Millie, and he was enthusiastic about it. And so that's young people, isn't it? And I always think,
yes.
we underestimate young people and what they can do and how they can motivate us,
Hmm.
basically.
That's
Um,
true.
and so how did you feel about that, bringing the family into to start this, feeding the
Uh,
homeless?
well, I felt fine. I just thought it was a natural thing to do. And for my kids, there's something about when you're a child, well, of course, they were moving up into their teen years, but they have the open hearts of children. No one tells them, don't do this or don't do that. They just respond quite naturally. But sooner or later, parents or society says, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And, there's something about the caring hearts of children. And, that was wonderful. And they were involved today. My one son has been involved with nonprofits. He started out as a media planner, but then he quickly knew he wanted to do something more. And so he worked with a number of different causes, from Alzheimer's to the blind to hearing impaired and so on, raising money for them. So his career went in that direction. My older son is in finance, and has been in finance and doing very well for a number of years. But he's also very generous and kind-hearted. Yeah, so you don't have to make it your career to make a difference, and he has made a
Absolutely.
difference in the lives of people in his own community, like paying for school for some underprivileged kids who couldn't afford to go to school. So I'm proud of my sons, and how they turned out.
Well, they've had a good teacher, Karen, right?
Oh, well, thank you. I hope so. I don't know.
So absolutely, and I think leading with kindness and compassion is the way that I would like to see the world moving towards, leading with kindness and compassion. I think we could all use a little bit more of that.
Especially in these days and
Right,
times,
right.
may feel frustrated about the politics and so on, but there's much you can do in your own
In
community.
your own backyard, right? Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Uh-huh.
So
You
can
know,
you can you share the story then of Family Promise and how it began and how you were able
yes,
to grow it?
yes. Well, having a couple of years going into New York, bringing sandwiches. We were helping the chronically homeless. But then I wondered, well, what's happening in New Jersey? And you don't see homeless people in my community of Summit. Well, that's another story. I'll tell you that afterwards. But I thought, the religious community might want to help if they knew there were homeless families. So I began volunteering in Elizabeth, and I met families that were living in their cars, in shelter when there was space available, living in somebody's back porch. But you don't see homeless families, and actually 35% of all those experiencing homelessness are members of families, And when you go through the drive-through at Burger King, the woman who hands you your burger and a drink and says, "God bless you, have a good day," and you return, "Thank you, God bless you." You assume that she's fine, but at the end of her shift, she retreats to her car where she sleeps in her car. So you don't see that woman as homeless because homeless families don't have any telltale signs. They're
Right.
out of sight. Yeah, and many are working, but they're the working poor and can't afford housing, or they got evicted because they had an unforeseen bill that they had to pay, and before you knew it, they got behind in their rent and were evicted. So families with children are the fastest growing segment of the homeless population.
Hmm.
So I thought the religious community needs to know about that, and
Right.
maybe they don't. And so I thought the first step had to be awareness. And how was I going to create awareness? Well, I'll plan a conference on family homelessness, which I did, and I invited the community at large, but especially mindful of religious congregations, because no matter what the faith, they all have the mandate to serve. And to my surprise, we were expecting about 100, but 200 came to that all-day conference. And
Wow.
that showed me right there that people are compassionate and do want to make a difference, And I guess they saw that this was some way they could be actively involved where, before, especially in the town I live in, and it's a commuter town, people are going into the city. They would see people on the streets and thought, well, what can I do? But now they found out there was a way that they could help. So that's how I began it, because how can you, like anything, even if it's in marketing, it's a product, you've got to create the need or make people aware of the need. And so that's what the conference did. And after that, we began meeting, and we looked for a building to provide shelter, and we couldn't find a building. The Armory couldn't provide shelter, not one church or synagogue could provide shelter. So getting very frustrated, I said, how about if we take turns? Maybe if we take turns, we can do together what any one of us cannot do alone. So I didn't find a building. I really built community by saying to the religious congregations, let's get 12 congregations together. And if each takes a week on rotation with each other, then the average congregation would do this about once a quarter. And so they turned classrooms into bedrooms. Volunteers cooked meals and brought the meals to the church. And sometimes their own children would come and volunteer. And it was very much of a family environment. And a couple of volunteers would spend the night. So I called it hospitality because I didn't want to call it a shelter, because I knew it would be more than that.
Well, there is
And
a stigma around that, isn't there? Is a stigma around
yes,
that
yeah,
word, right?
word shelter, yes. And I
Yeah.
also thought, well, if I call it hospitality, any authorities they won't be alerted that this is a shelter. I don't think I was fooling anyone, but it also, denotes hospitality. And relationship, which
Yeah.
is what it turned out to be.
Yeah. Well,
And it was just
sorry, go ahead.
amazing to see how many volunteers came out, to prepare a meal, to play with children, to stay overnight. We had too many volunteers the first couple of years because everybody wanted to do that. So if you say the word homeless and oh, people don't care, they do care. They just need a way to help. And so that was it. My way began when I gave a sandwich to Millie, but they began when I created this program that was doable. And the funny thing is, I thought it would be second best, but then after it was running for a while, we had a high success rate, 71% found housing in just 6 weeks, and more came out of that. You know, families felt accepted. They felt like they were at home, even though they weren't at home. And so at some point, I said to myself, maybe it wasn't to find a building rather than finding a building. I was building community, and community heals when you have volunteers preparing meals or bringing their own kids and playing with guest children. That's healing, and you get the two groups talking to each other. So that had I found a building or one church that could be a full-time shelter, it wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, wouldn't have
And
had the
and
same impact, right? And
yeah.
I think
But I
what you're
didn't.
saying about the volunteers and the communities and
Mhm.
getting the different congregations together is that,
Yeah.
you did create that feeling of community, but also
Hmm.
isn't it amazing that, people do want to help, but they're looking for somebody a leader like yourself, to pull
Hmm.
it together, to pull
Hmm.
people together and create that. And I do
Yes.
feel that is the way to go. I do
Hmm.
feel that's the way
Well,
to move forward
yes.
it's out of, individuals, and it's down in its community, because it takes a village to raise a child, right?
That's true.
Oh,
That's true.
right?
What's interesting is you said it takes a leader like you. When I was working in the corporate world, I gave presentations. They were okay, but I can't say they were filled with passion. And I've always considered myself a shy person. But the interesting thing was because I so much believed in helping homeless families, I was passionate about it. My passion drove right through my shyness, and I became a leader.
Yeah.
Because before that, I don't think anyone would say Karen Olson is a leader. I certainly say that today. But if you really, really believe in yourself,
Yeah.
believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing, then you can go right through that. So I just think it's
Absolutely.
important to say I wasn't born a leader. I became a leader because of my passion to help.
And it's been funny. I've been banging on about follow your passion. And what is passion if not joy, right? What gets you up in the morning? What are you really passionate about? What brings you joy? And you
Right.
you found it, and you broke through that fear. And sometimes
Hmm.
it is
Hmm.
about being a little bit of a risk taker, and going against the grain
Hmm.
to make a
Yes.
difference, right?
Yeah, very much so. I did go against the grain, but what enabled me to do that was my belief, and I was doing the right thing and
Right.
helping families. And I had opposition along the way. There were some churches and synagogues that wanted me just to raise money for existing agencies. I don't know if that was because they didn't want to get involved, but I had quite a bit of opposition. But you know what that did? It just strengthened my resolve and allowed me to tighten my plan. I made it airtight and I kept going. So sometimes resistance is good because when you meet that resistance, you try harder and you work around it.
I do feel, Karen, that that there are these charities that are set up, And I shop in secondhand stores. When I go back to the UK, I shop in charity shops. I find some
Mhm.
wonderful, wonderful clothes, and it's
I'll
also my
bet.
way of giving back, and I can
Uh-huh.
help local communities. But I do find that, if you just we give money to charities, there are so many scams these days, and so many, you know, so many statistics about, how much money is given to the companies, the corporations, and
Mhm.
how little of the money actually goes to helping people. So I do think
Mhm.
it's really nice when you can actually step in and do something as a
Yes.
community instead of an individual.
Right. Yeah. And of course, people who donate to Family Promise know Family Promise and know the kind of grassroots movement we have that
Right,
we're able to do what we do because we're able to mobilize so many volunteers.
right.
So yeah, that's very good.
So can you talk a little bit about the difference with family homelessness and individual homelessness?
Yeah, certainly. Individual homelessness includes those who are chronically homeless, and you will see that many have a mental health issue or substance abuse issue. Not all, but they're more, those are the folks you would see, lying on the subway grate with maybe an alcohol bottle by their side. They're more apt to have a substance abuse or mental health issue, but not all of them. But families, who were about 35% of all those who were homeless. And, what's shocking is that annually 1 out of every 30 children will experience homelessness during the year. And
Crazy statistic, isn't it?
I know, yeah, something people don't know. The issue with families primarily is poverty. They're living at the poverty line or below the poverty line, and they have no savings. And most homeless families are working. One or two parents are working, but they're making low wages, so the budget's very tight. And along comes a car repair, and they have to repair their car because they need to get to work.
Right.
And that upsets the budget and one more expense. Before you know it, they can't pay the rent and they end up homeless. So most for families, the main issue is poverty and but the precipitating cause may be loss of a job, an illness, a divorce. It can be a variety of things, but the root cause is the lack of affordable housing. Today, for every 4 housing units that or for people are eligible for 4 units, but only one actually gets it because that's all they can. That's all. I hope you can edit that out because I messed that up.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine, Karen. I totally understand. There is a housing crisis everywhere. There's a problem in the UK as well. I mean, I live
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Italy, and I'm not sure how it is in Italy, but I do know in the UK that, for example, my niece has two young children. She's living with her
Uh-huh.
grandparents at the moment, and she's on the waiting list for a
Yes,
home.
exactly.
And
That's what it is.
it is difficult. And even though she's got one of the top priorities, there are very little houses available for
Right.
her, very
Yeah.
little choice.
Yeah.
And
And
this is the
yeah,
problem.
yeah. And here in the United States, only 1 out of 4 families who are eligible for federal housing actually receives it because it's just not funded. The federal government doesn't make the commitment to make the housing available. So only 1 in 4 that's eligible actually receives low-income housing.
It's
And there's
crazy
just,
for me, Karen. I don't know about you, sorry, but it's crazy for
uh,
me that in this day and age,
uh-huh.
there are so many things wrong, right? There are people that are starving. There are people that are homeless. We're still at war. There are so many things that in the 21st century, I'm shaking my head,
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's hard to
isn't
get
it?
your mind and heart around it. But
Right.
yeah, they say that 60% of Americans can't pay for an unforeseen bill that comes their way of $400.
Right.
So that shows you how tight it is for
Right.
most people.
And of
And
course, you've got
so,
medical, haven't you? You've got medical in America, which is also expensive. And if you've got a
uh,
sick person in the family and you've got medical bills to pay, that's
mhm,
another situation that would exacerbate your living
exactly.
conditions, right?
Yes. There are many expenses that can upset the apple cart and you can end up homeless. But again, if you're a family, you're not really seeing, you may be living in your car, you know. Yeah, a lot of families retreat to their car. One family that just came into our program, they were living in their car in the park. And she said to me, we didn't stay in the good section of the park because that's where the police patrol. We went to the dangerous area of the park because they don't patrol there. So they learn all the techniques to try to survive, but it's very hard. Or they stay in their car and they wash their children up in the morning at McDonald's. I mean, they're real
Right.
survivors.
Yeah.
And so when they come into our program, we can give them the tools and what they need to find housing. Today, Family Promise, which is a national organization with close to 200 affiliates nationwide, has an 81% success rate in helping families find permanent housing. And what's amazing about that is most shelters just count bed nights. They don't even consider helping families to find housing. It's just,
Right.
here's a bed and you can stay here
It's a
for,
band-aid problem, isn't it? It's just putting the
yes,
band-aid on it and not really
and-
looking at the root cause, right?
right, yeah, yeah. They don't look at the root cause. Well, maybe because of budget limitations or whatever. But at Family Promise, we soon saw that families needed so much more and that we could help them in so many ways with literacy and job training and helping them find that daycare. And I think it's because we're a volunteer-driven organization. We found the resources that families need, often through the help of volunteers. So when I started, I was naive. You know, remember, I'm not a social worker. I hadn't run an agency, and
Right.
now I was running this, and I just thought, well, we'll just give them shelter and it'll be fine. And then we began to see all the other needs, and other agencies helped us, and the volunteers reached out. So yeah, we're quite successful, and we're low cost because we use existing resources. Some of our affiliates do have a building now, and they provide shelter through that too,
Right.
but they're still cost effective and community based. So there are solutions, but government must be involved too. It can't, the problem is too
Right.
great, you know.
Yeah.
You could have, you know, 5,000 Family Promise affiliates or 100,000 Habitats for Humanity, and it wouldn't solve the problem. Government has to provide the policy and the financial support to make it a priority. And unfortunately, I don't see them doing that in near term.
I
It's
know,
too crazy here.
I know, and
It's
I
too
know you,
crazy.
I know, and it's not just in America either. I mean, and I know you've talked about this, the need for policy reforms and partnerships, and it is crucial, isn't it, to move beyond individual acts. Like someone, like myself, I said I shop in the secondhand stores, and I know that I'm helping local charities, or I used to volunteer. I used to be part of the
Mhm.
Lions Club, for example, and
Nice.
I
Yeah.
used to volunteer and help children read, for example, the children that
Mhm.
were struggling in school or had difficult homes. Um, and it is very rewarding to do that.
Yes.
But again, it was with a community. I wouldn't have just been able to do that on my own. It's
No.
difficult,
Yeah.
right? So it's easier when we do it together in a community.
Mhm. Yeah. Most definitely.
But I
And
do,
that's what Family Promise is, a community.
right, exactly.
Mhm.
But I do think you're absolutely right that governments need to get involved because, as I said, I shake my head. It's like, in this day and age, why we still have homelessness and why it's still a problem. Individuals, I understand sometimes they have got,
Mhm.
disabilities and um, some issues that need addressing, but family homelessness is a completely different ball game when you've got
Yes,
the whole
it is.
family, especially when you've
Yeah.
got parents working and they're on the breadline and they can't
Mhm.
afford to even rent an apartment or a house for themselves and their children.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, or maybe some do have housing, but they have to be on that breadline because they can't afford to buy the food.
right.
So it's really excruciating. But one thing I'll say about individuals who are homeless in Summit, where I live, I'm on a task force to help people who are experiencing homelessness. And we had 25 men and women, singles, who were homeless in Summit, and they formed a task force. And 20 of the 25 found housing with the help of volunteers and agencies. And it's life-changing. I know this one man, Bob, who I was talking with and helping in whatever way I could. And he was living in the park and sometimes in the post office, sleeping on the floor. And it was really, really hard. He lived that for 6 years until they helped him find housing, and now he's a new man. He has a one bedroom apartment, but he has a kitchen, and on St. Patrick's Day, he cooked corned beef and cabbage, and you know, he's shaven now, and he looks healthy, and his life has changed. Why has his life changed? Because he has housing now, and
Right.
he can hold his head up high, and it's just wonderful. So when people can find housing, it's a big difference. And, there are a lot of volunteers here in Summit who have helped to make that possible. It's a caring community. And it's where I started Family Promise. So even with singles, you know, and I would say of the 25 that are homeless, and we've been able to get 20 in housing, the other five, some have a mental illness problem or a substance abuse problem, but we're trying to help them. But people's lives can be turned around if you just, someone cares.
It's a vicious cycle, isn't it, Karen? Because I believe that unless you've got a fixed abode, you can't find a job.
Right, that's true. You need a permanent address. And
So,
how are you going to prepare yourself for your job?
right.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and you've
Once you
got,
have housing, everything else is possible. You can go to work, your children can go to school, your health is better. Yeah.
so do you think governments could work a lot better with, or do they work at all with non-profit organizations to address homelessness? Do they
Well, they do. There are government grants that agencies can get to help homeless people experiencing homelessness. It's just not enough help.
right,
That's why you have many who are not housed, but they do help with grants to help individuals and families experiencing homelessness to help them find housing. Sometimes the grants are to help nonprofits build housing. It's just the issue is just not enough to help all those who are experiencing homelessness.
right. So if there's any governments listening, we need your help. If you know anybody
Yeah.
in government, we need more help.
Well, yeah. Well, that is the solution with a partnership between the
Correct.
community, the nonprofit sector, and government. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And we can work so much more efficiently, cost effectively than the government. When the government builds housing, it's not very cost effective. but money from the government allows nonprofits to build the housing. Like out in Grand Rapids, there's 50 units of manufactured housing that they've been able to build or renovate because of government's help. So, government has the money and nonprofits can work smart. Just needs to be brought up to a higher scale.
Right.
But I guess I'm optimistic, or, from the time I began Family Promise, I see that people really do want to help and make a difference. And
I
that's
think you've
very,
got to be optimistic, haven't you? And it really helps. And I
yeah.
think that's part and parcel of being
Mm.
passionate about something,
Yes,
is
it's
that
true.
you're more optimistic about it because you've got a passion
Mhm.
for it and you'll make it happen regardless.
Yeah, we're seeing change. It's
Right.
true.
Right.
Mm.
So let's talk about, because you had an accident, didn't you, in 2019?
Yes, I did. Well, in 2016, in January, I decided, well, before that, I decided it was time to retire, that I had done a lot and I wanted to turn the reins over to someone else, and that someone else was very good. He had worked with me for 20 years. And so I had an excellent succession plan in place. And so in January of 2016, I retired. And in 2000, so I retired and I traveled to India, and I did, do different things that I wanted to do. And in 2019, on February 12th, I was sitting by the pool of a condo in Miami Beach, and I was contemplating my 2 o'clock appointment for cryotherapy. Do you know what cryotherapy is?
I've heard of it.
Okay. It's cold therapy. I don't know how long it's been around, but very cold therapy. And you get in this chamber, and there's like fumes of very cold air, but really bitter cold. And that cold is supposed to give you mental and physical benefits. And we had um, an organization that offered that in Summit, New Jersey. And also when I was in Miami Beach, this hotel and condo complex offered it. So I went there, and the woman at the desk said, well, you'll have a new attendant. She's just started with us 4 weeks ago, but she's been well trained. And I thought, well, okay, the 30 times I had done this, I didn't have any bad experience. But when I got in the tank or the chamber, it was exceptionally cold. And I don't really have a memory of this, but she said I was saying, I'm cold, I'm cold, I'm cold. So she went around to the back of the door to the chamber and opened it up. But when she was in the back, she couldn't, she should have been in front of me to help me out. So when she was in the back, I just fell out like a popsicle and hit my head on a raised ledge. It was like frozen.
Oh,
In fact, I was frozen because when the rescue squad came, they said I was hypothermic.
right.
So I hit my head. Yeah, and I didn't have any feeling from the neck down at all. But I had the presence of mind to call my two sons, which I did, and they came right down. And I got in the ambulance and they took me to Miami-Dade Hospital,
Right.
which was a trauma care hospital, and operated on the back of my neck. And so anyhow, to make a long story short, 6 years later, I'm able to take steps with a walker and the help of my PT person. So I've made a lot of progress on even able to paint with my left hand. I'm an artist, and the painting behind me, you can see of the grass. That's one that I did.
Right.
And so now, and I was right-handed, but now I paint with my left. So I keep making progress. And I'm in a wheelchair, but life goes on. I'm not walking, but I'm just the same. I'm the same person, you know.
It's adaptability, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah. And there's some hidden blessings because I love working with all my aides. They're wonderful. And my assistant Jen is amazing. And she's helped me write the book and does all kinds of things, even styles my hair sometimes for me. So
That's nice.
uh,
Well,
yeah.
that's a great segue into your book. So, Meant
Uh,
for More is a blueprint for social change. So, let's talk about your book, Meant for More.
okay. Meant for more, following your heart and finding your purpose. I wrote the book because I was hearing so many wonderful stories about guests or homeless families and volunteers who were making such a difference. And I wanted to share those stories. And I also wanted to share my story about how I formed Family Promise. And I had never shared with people that I my mother had committed suicide and the loss of my mother. So I shared that in the book. And it's gone very well. It just inspires people to make a difference and offers ways that they can create change, whether it's locally or nationally, and sometimes the smallest thing, you can do allows people to make a difference, hold the door open for someone,
Right.
remove the newspapers on your neighbor's steps while they're away, leave a gift bag for a new neighbor or donate some of your gently worn clothing to someone. There's so many ways you can make a difference, and I share that in the book, but mostly it's my story, part memoir, and the stories of many other people, like Pace, who was a scientist and he said, I only had time for three things: work, my family, and church. But when he transferred to Sandia Labs. They were giving him a going away party, and he didn't care for, I mean, he didn't pay attention to all the accolades of everyone except this one woman, Alice, who got up and talked about how Pace on a rainy day, a rainy night, stopped and helped her change her tire. And she was so struck by that he no longer was a suit, just a suit. He was someone who was caring and had feelings. Pace went on to get involved with Family Promise when it came to his church. And he also had families back to his house. He had a zip line where families could ride the zip line and in doing that, conquer their fears a bit. And, and he said to me, he said, Family Promise helped me have a more expansive heart. His heart was always there, but he hadn't really gotten involved. And getting involved like that, he found a new pace, He really felt that Family Promise and all that he did helped him have an expansive heart. And he's no longer working with Family Promise, but he's still involved in the community now. So that made a big difference for him and for many volunteers.
Well, I'm sure that your book is inspirational.
Mhm.
You've taken the risk. You did something that, other people would not have done. It takes courage to do that as well, right? It
Mhm.
takes courage
Yes.
to take that first step and to say, hey, these people need help. Who's
Hmm.
going to do it? Well, I'll start,
Yeah, that's exactly it.
right?
I'll
I'll
start. You don't know where it's going, and that's fine.
That's right.
But
And you
just
did
start.
say along the way you weren't sure. You weren't a social worker, you weren't a care worker,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
didn't know these things. But,
right.
and I think that that's what most people worry about when they're starting something new or they want to, they've got a passion
Hmm.
for something, but they say, oh, they start thinking about running before they're walking. And it's just about taking that small step in the
Right.
direction of of what you want and what's right for you. Not
Yeah,
about what
start out.
everybody else is saying or doing, it's how
Right,
you feel about it, right? And taking that first
right.
step.
And yeah, trying to meet the need where you are. And
Right.
it's not about forming an organization, just whether you give somebody a sandwich or you volunteer at a shelter,
Yeah.
just begin and see
Because
where
I'm
it takes you.
I'm sure that when you first gave away that sandwich to Millie, you had no idea that years later you would have created this amazing organization, written a book
Right.
about your life story and the stories
Yeah.
of others.
Well, yeah. And if somebody said to me, look, you're going to go on to create this organization and help 1 million people, I would say, no, no, you're crazy. I can't do that. It would be overwhelming. But
Right.
you take one step and you see where that goes. Maybe it'll go far. Maybe it'll just be about offering a caring word to someone who's homeless and, maybe a sandwich. But the thing is just to begin.
Absolutely. And I think that probably answers the question of, what's
Mhm.
the most important thing people can do to help or to make an impact in their communities or help with family homelessness. And I think you quite eloquently answered that question with just give them a sandwich to start with, right?
Yeah, you
Something
can.
small.
Yeah. Or look at the shelters, for instance, in your community and
Right.
offer to volunteer. And maybe you won't think you have anything to give, but can you take a picture? Maybe you can do a portrait, a photo portrait for a family that's never had that, or help them with an arts and crafts project. Or if you like to cut hair, you could cut hair for the women or the men, in
Right.
shelter. So there's many things that you have
Yeah.
that you could offer to make a difference.
Wonderful. Fantastic. And I'm going to finish this interview with two questions I ask all my guests, Karen. And the first
Uh-huh.
is, if you had a chance to whisper something in your younger self's ear, what would you say?
I'd say life can be tough, but hang on, you're gonna go beyond the hurdles and make a big difference. Just don't give up, because you will make a difference, and just hang on.
Good. Nice answer. Yeah. And what's
Uh-huh.
the heart of your story that you hope will resonate with our female listeners and inspire them on their own
Mhm.
paths?
Well, again, I wasn't degreed in social work or anything like that. I just didn't pay any attention to that. I just did what was in my heart. I just followed my heart and ended up making a difference. I wasn't a social work, or I didn't study nonprofit management, but I took a step at a time. In fact, I didn't even know what a nonprofit was when I began. And a minister said, well, you're going to have to form a nonprofit. I said, what's a nonprofit? So, yeah, just begin, and you'll see that you can make a difference
Yeah.
in your community,
Very
and
nice bit of wisdom.
you'll draw others to help you, or not, and just something that you do on your own. But there's a joy in doing that. There's such a joy in helping others.
There is, isn't there? What a lovely way to
Mhm.
end. There's a joy in helping others. That's a beautiful way to end. So, a million
Mhm.
thanks to Karen for joining me today. Thanks to our audience for hanging out with us. We hope you found it inspiring and empowering. And to find out more about either Karen or myself, you can find all the
Mhm.
details below. So, until next time, this is Beth and Karen signing
Mhm.
off.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye, Beth. Bye.